through the rest of the week, but milder again by Friday. Bye-bye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
The BBC totally capitulates to Gary Lineker. We'll ask and debate tonight, is the BBC now beyond hope? A new book out from Professor Matthew Goodwin that shows that Westminster is even further away from Middle England than it was before the Brexit referendum. Lee Anderson comes in with his latest campaign, an idea that we should teach kids at school about suicide. Maybe that would stop a few young people taking their lives. And joining me on Talking Pints, Ali Mirage, conservative political activist and the founder of something called the Contrarian Prize. We'll find out what that's all about. All of that in a couple of minutes, but first, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, let's bring you some breaking news we've had just in the last few moments. We've heard the disgraced pop star Gary Glitter has been recalled to prison after breaching his licence conditions. In a statement, the Ministry of Justice said protecting the public is their #1 priority. The 78-year-old was released last month after serving half of his 16-year sentence for sexually abusing 3 girls. That just coming to us within the last few moments. Gary Glitter, 78 years old, real name Paul Gadd, has, after serving only half of his 16-year sentence and being released last month, broken his bail conditions and is being recalled to prison. We'll bring you more detail on that, of course, as we get it. Now, in other news tonight, the Prime Minister says it's the right decision for the government to pledge more money into bolstering the UK's defences. Number 10 announced today defence spending will rise by almost £5 billion over 2 years. It comes as Rishi Sunak met his Australian counterpart Albanese in San Diego ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact, as it's known, between the United States, the UK and Australia. Well, plans to be announced with President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered subs to Australia. Ahead of that meeting, Mr Sunak praised the current relationship between the UK and America.
The relationship with America economically is very strong. Our exports are growing massively anyway, and we are concluding agreements with states. Remember, many American states are as big as most countries, and actually increasing our economic ties at a state level is something that can be really good for Britain and good for jobs, and so we're getting on and doing that.
Now, the government's illegal migration bill is currently being debated in the House of Commons tonight. It's the second reading, and the legislation will allow for the removal of Channel migrants from the UK. Under the proposals, those attempting to cross the English Channel would be banned from future re-entry and blocked from applying for UK citizenship. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says stopping small boats is her top priority.
The British public know that border security is national security, that illegal migration makes us all less safe. They know that the financial and social costs of uncontrolled and illegal migration are unsustainable. They know that if our borders are to mean anything, we must control who comes into this country and the terms under which they remain here.
Speaking earlier on today. Now, lastly, the TV presenter Gary Lineker has been reinstated to Match of the Day presenting after reaching an agreement with the BBC today. That's after he was taken off air over a tweet about the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General has apologised and said the corporation is launching an independent review of its social media guidelines. The board has welcomed the move, saying impartiality is a cornerstone of the BBC. Speaking to the BBC, the Director General, Tim Davie, said he took proportionate action. That's all from the newsroom for now. We're back in an hour. Now back to Farage.
Well, it's a bit early, I suppose, for the tennis season, but it is game, set and match to Gary Lineker. What an extraordinary few days. An openly, willfully provocative tweet by Gary Lineker saying that the current government's policies when it comes to illegal immigration makes them sound like those political figures from Germany in the 1930s. Well, the row, of course, has been about chiefly impartiality, but actually the tweet itself was a disgrace. And to compare senior figures in government to Goebbels and the gang is, frankly, in my view, nothing less than hate speech. Funny, isn't it? Those that tell you how wonderful and virtuous they are often are those that spread the real hate. For the BBC, the whole thing's been a disaster, and in many ways a self-inflicted one. 3 years ago, there were arguments over Gary Lineker being overtly political. It's one thing to have an opinion. You know, Gary could have said, look, only 45,000 came across the channel last year. I think we should take a load more. That would have been an opinion. But to come out and directly attack the government when you are being paid 1.35 million quid a year, effectively by taxpayers, because we don't really have much choice as to whether we buy a BBC licence, clearly was in breach of the rules, because the main rule for anyone working for the BBC is not to bring it into disrepute. Well, in my view, clearly he did. But the BBC have brought this upon themselves. They should have been much clearer with him 3 years ago as to what he could and could not do. So he gets his fellow mate presenters to refuse to appear on programmes. BBC Sport is in a panic. And this morning, Tim Davie, the Director General, totally and utterly capitulates, hence game, set and match to Lineker. But far from just accepting that he'd won, no, that wouldn't be enough for Gary Lineker. No, he decides to go on the offensive. and puts out a series of tweets and finishes up by saying, a final thought, however difficult the last few days have been, it simply does not compare to having to leave your home, from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen empathy towards their plight from so many of you. So he keeps on going. He didn't mention, by the way, young Albanians coming to join criminal gangs. No, to Gary, these are all virtuous people. But it shows that basically he's got away with it. He's stuck two fingers up to the BBC. This is a big victory, actually, for the hard left. And I suspect what will happen next is Richard Sharp, the chairman of the board, will be forced out, and the BBC effectively will become even more left-wing than it is now. He won't stop doing what he's doing. No doubt he'll be encouraged to be even more provocative as a general election approaches. Who knows? Maybe Match of the Day will be sponsored by the Labour Party. That's a joke. We'll have to see. But I think this bodes very badly for a BBC that, in my opinion, has been getting worse and worse and worse. Is the BBC now beyond saving? Give me your thoughts, Farage at gbnews.uk, because I think it may well be. Now, I'm joined by David Keithley, a former BBC News producer and director of Newswatch, and you have spent many years tracking and monitoring the BBC on the grounds of impartiality. And I wanted just to play you a little clip that I heard at 5 to 9 this morning. And this was Mehdi Hassan, former BBC employee. He worked here for The Guardian. He now works for MSNBC in America. And this is what he had to say about American politics.
And then on the US, do you think that, because a lot of the time you're referring to is, I mean, you took on a lot of Trump supporters. I think that's what you're mostly referring to about the battle for democracy. Is it different now? Does it feel different in the Biden time?
I wish I could say that is, but Donald Trump is running for office again, just 2 years after he incited an armed insurrection at the Capitol. And he's more extreme, more insane and more anti-democratic than he was in 2020. And the next election is going to be
more isolated, isn't he? Do you really think that he could become the candidate? What about Ron DeSantis?
If you look at the polling, he's doubling Ron DeSantis' lead. He's, this is a guy who will go scorched earth. He defeated 16 Republicans in 2016. He's already referred to DeSantis as a paedophile, which is a reminder of how Trump has no limits. And I think DeSantis is deeply overrated, has a glass jaw. And I think, sadly, Trump is probably the favourite to be the GOP nominee again. And in a polarised country, he's tying with Biden in the polls, which is remarkable.
So there we are. That was the Today programme this morning. You've got a journalist there accusing the immediate ex-president of being insane, of leading an armed insurrection. It's the first time I've heard it used or described in those terms, and he's a threat to democracy. There's no counter from the BBC at all. Do you know, if I sat here, David, with an American Republican who came out with a string of accusations against Biden like that, if I didn't balance and check it in some way, I mean, Ofcom, quite rightly in a way, given the legislation, would be on my back. But in your view, the Today programme's got a bit of a history of this.
It certainly has. I think the BBC these days inhabits its own bubble. It's called confirmation bias. And the trouble is that they...
Confirmation bias, explain.
Well, the people working within an organisation absorb the values of the culture within which they inhabit. And unfortunately, the BBC has gradually, over the years, become much, much more, as you so aptly put it, left-leaning. And they don't see it themselves. It's what they think the world is like.
Yeah.
And what Michel Hussein was doing there was not actually putting the counter view at all. It's because it doesn't occur to people like her that you should put the counter view, because they think that is proven fact.
I mean, David, in the past, I was a campaigner for Britain to leave the EU, and you famously did a lot of work that led to the so-called Wilson Review, where they said on issues like Europe and immigration, they would act with impartiality, admitting their mistakes of the past. And I thought maybe we'd achieve something of a breakthrough. I think the BBC now is worse than it ever was.
Yes, and basically, I believe, and my organisation, Newswatch, believes, that it's because the complaints process itself is not up to standard. It's a joke, in fact. The BBC are still their own judge and jury. On matters of internal complaints, they look after the vast majority. In the past year that there's figures, they upheld only about 12 complaints through their ECU, which is a bit like the Star Chamber internal. And they had something like 492,000 complaints in total. What we need, what the BBC midterm review needs to do, which is due to report in May, the DCMS is dealing with that at the moment, is just to overhaul the complaint system and make it robustly and genuinely independent. I think if that happens, although the rot has set in so much, it'll be a very difficult turnaround, there would be a chance.
OK, so maybe the BBC's not beyond hope.
No, it may be possible. There are good journalists at the BBC. I come back to the point that the confirmation bias is, and that is fed in the complaints area and their editorial standards area by the fact that they're not getting sufficiently robust outside views.
So would strong government leadership make a difference here?
It could well do, yes.
Well, we could do with that.
Yes.
And what do we learn, David, from the Lineker saga of the last few days? What does it tell us?
Well, because the BBC are not serious about policing impartiality, they tie themselves in knots. And I think what happened with Tim Davie over the past few days is he got scared of the reaction. He thought that there was going to be a mass turn-off or something like that.
And yet the polling shows that nearly three-quarters of the country think Lineker was wrong to say what he said. They may not have thought he should lose his job over it,
yes,
but on the issue, saying that to try and stop illegal immigration and comparing the Home Secretary and Prime Minister to Goebbels and the gang, the vast majority of the country are in a different place. What was Davie scared of?
I don't really know precisely. I mean, it's staggering, really, that a man of his experience is so at sea over this. But the point is that there are guidelines which say high-profile presenters, and the BBC took a lot of trouble to introduce these over the past few years. High-profile presenters should not engage in political issues in the way that Gary Lineker did.
Yeah, overtly party political.
Yes, yes.
So May's a big moment, yeah?
It is, yes, and the build-up to May. And we've been challenging the BBC over many months and years now, and gradually we're pushing towards we're doing a judicial. We've got permission to go for a judicial review of how they judge impartiality. We're challenging them on freedom of information matters, and I think they are rattled at the moment. They just don't know what to do.
Come back to us in May. Tell us what the outcome of this is, and tell us whether or not there is going to be a genuine independent body to marshal impartiality. Because I tell you what, if David Keith doesn't get his way, then I do believe the BBC is actually beyond saving, and the moment will have come to openly and clearly call for the licence fee simply to end. Maybe we'll give them just this one last chance, but it really is a last chance. In a moment, Professor Matthew Goodwin comes in. He's got a new book. It's going to tell us that Westminster, the mob behind us here, are actually even more out of touch with ordinary folk than they were before the Brexit referendum. All of that in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. On the BBC, is it beyond hope? One viewer says, abolish the TV tax, make the BBC go independent and broadcast as it pleases. Everyone wins. It's the best and fairest way forward. Mick says, yes, the BBC is just a lefty mouthpiece. TV tax should end now. And Martin says the BBC has had its day. Well, maybe the whole model of the licence fee has had its day. Maybe I was being overly generous by saying give them one last chance to set up an independent body outside of the BBC's four walls. Now, Professor Matthew Goodwin, Professor of Politics from the University of Kent. In the past, Matthew, in the run-up to the Brexit referendum happening, the result, the 2019 landslide, you've written in the past about national populism, you've written about the disconnect between Westminster and ordinary folk, but you've come back with a new book, Values, Voice and Virtue, which is almost like a temperature test of where we are today. And from what I can tell, having not yet read it, from what I can tell, you're kind of saying, actually, on many issues, our political class is even further apart than it was before Brexit.
I think that's true in many ways. I mean, this book essentially tries to explain how we got here. And if you look at the last 10 years of British politics, the way I see it, we had 3 big revolts that changed the country. We had the rise of parties like UKIP and yourself. We had the vote for Brexit. We then had the election of Boris Johnson and that realignment of our politics, the fall of the Red Wall. And what I've tried to do in the book is basically say, look, where did all of this come from and where are we going? And the answer in short is that we now have a new elite in this country that doesn't really reflect the values of a majority of the country, doesn't give many people a serious voice in the institutions, and doesn't see all groups in society as having the same virtue or the same sense of moral worth as other groups in society.
And yet, we're constantly hearing political leaders talking about diversity.
Right.
You know, that we're given the impression that Westminster is now more diverse than it ever was before. Isn't that true?
Well, one of my arguments in the book is that if you look at most of our institutions, if you look at the House of Commons just over there, if you look at the media, creative industries, cultural institutions, the universities, the civil service, yes, they like to talk about diversity, but they're not actually that diverse at all. They tend to be dominated by people from the same backgrounds, who went to the same universities, who tend to share the same sets of values. And if you look, for example, at the Gary Lineker saga would be a good example of this. Often the worldview that is celebrated in these institutions is not held by people outside of those institutions. And on these new cultural questions, you know, the small boats crisis, Britishness, who we are, immigration, crime, that divide is as big today as it was at any point really in recent years. So in the book, what I'm trying to say is, look, I think we can do a better job as a country of trying to close these divides. Here are some suggestions for how we might do that. But first of all, let's get real about why we're here in the first place.
Some of the numbers here are quite extraordinary. 6 out of 10 people think Britain is broken. I'm one of them. 7 out of 10 think that the experts in this country don't understand people like them. That's real disconnect. And 50%, are you telling us 50% of British people think that none of the main parties represent their priorities and values?
Yeah, there's millions of people.
50%.
There are. It depends how you ask the question. Some questions would suggest the numbers are even larger than that. Look, there are lots of people out there who are looking at left and right, probably watching this show and thinking nobody in politics speaks for me, nobody represents my values, nobody gives me a voice. This book partly is written for those people because I think if you look at our national conversation, if you look at the way we talk about Britain, you know, essentially, you can only talk about Britain, really, if you're equating Britishness with diversity. And it's almost like saying we don't have an identity of our own. We don't have a distinctive
no, we do, and
identity.
we're ashamed of it. We're ashamed of our past.
Well, there's also, what I talk about is that there's a section within the elite who I call the progressives, the radical progressives, and they really do look down on the country. They are obsessed with this idea that Britain is institutionally racist. They're obsessed with talking about empire. They are absolutely convinced that rights for minorities have not gone far enough. They need to go further. They're quite ashamed of their British identity, and they also disproportionately dominate many of the institutions. They represent about 15% of the country. But out there are lots of people who, even after Brexit, even after the 2019 election, are even still today saying they're not really in the conversation. They're not switching to Labour, by the way.
No.
They're not switching to anybody. They're giving up on politics. They're saying they're not going to vote at the next election. I mean, this is my big fear. We've got about a third of the country to 40% of voters saying, I'm just disengaging. I've had enough. I tried to change the system. I can't be bothered. And so I suppose, in a self-interested way, writing this book was an attempt to have a dialogue with them, to say, look, you know, I'm out here having a conversation about the way you feel about the country, but it's also about having a dialogue with the people in the institutions and saying, if you don't start giving these voters a voice, if you don't start reflecting their values on the BBC homepage, on Radio 4 Today, and all of this stuff, we're going to have a bigger problem in this country, and we're going to start looking a lot like America. And I don't really want to look like America. I want our politics to be better, more cohesive, more stable.
The difference in America is there is a fundamental policy difference on a range of issues between the Democrats and the Republicans. Isn't one of the problems here? They're almost the same.
Well, I think over the last decade, a lot of people were looking for a challenge to the consensus, what I call the liberal consensus that's dominated Britain for 50 years. Pro-immigration, pro-globalisation, pro-EU, pro-social liberalism. Since Brexit, we've basically got more of the same. I mean, we've got, you know, more immigration. We've got basically an elite that sort of is very regretful that we've left the EU and won't stop saying how bad Brexit is. We've got a continued embrace of globalisation, of putting the interests of big business ahead of the national community. And we've got this sort of escalation of this kind of woke politics, this obsession with racialising everything, from schools to universities to the media. We just cannot stop ourselves talking about race and ethnicity in this new gender identity politics. And I think we have to take a step back from this. I mean, we're not America. We have a completely different history. We have a completely different past. Yeah. And I think we need to get back to trying to think about the things that actually unify us as a country and not positioning groups against one another simply because of their racial or their ethnic or their gender identity. That is a recipe for disaster.
I better read it.
There you go.
There we are. Values, Voice and Virtue by Matthew Goodwin, out in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much indeed for coming in and sharing that with us. And yeah, out of touch. Well, tell you what, you look at the polling on whether people think the government are right to at least attempt to try to stop illegal crossings in the Channel, and you find an overwhelming majority actually agree. In a moment, I'll be joined by Lee Anderson, Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, who's coming in to talk about his latest campaign, and that is to try and educate children at school about the risks and threats of suicide.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
An e-petition signed by 159,000 people reached Westminster Hall for debate earlier on today. And quite simply, it calls for suicide prevention to be made a compulsory part of the national curriculum. One of the MPs that spoke in that debate today was Lee Anderson, Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashfield. Here he was earlier.
For a man to watch a little boy from a baby grow up, be his pride and joy, and to take his life in that way, and Graham feels broken, he probably feels guilty, and he feels hopeless. But I'm here to tell Graham today that he's none of those things. He's not guilty and he's not hopeless, because Graham's working with this charity and he's going to raise thousands of pounds. And Graham wholeheartedly supports the idea of putting this on the school curriculum and helping people and getting people to talk, to save some lives. So I guess what I'd say to the Minister, Mr Stringer, is please look at these families over here. These are broken people. And we need to see less of these families come into this place. We need to intervene. We need to get this on the school curriculum, and we need to save lives. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Well, I'm joined by Lee Anderson here in the studio and by Graham Link, the constituent that Lee was talking about earlier. Lee, suicide in the under-40s, biggest cause of death. What got you on? I mean, obviously, Graham's a constituent. What got you onto this? And
big problem. Obviously, Graham, my constituent, lost his son just before Christmas. Nobody saw it coming.
Yeah.
So as soon as it happened, I promised Graham that I'd help him. I found out there was a debate today, so I put my name down to speak in that debate. And that's about getting suicide awareness back on the curriculum, so people can talk to specialists in school, because, like I say, Nigel, this is the biggest killer of young men under 40 in this country. It's epidemic level. Nobody's talking about it, but they're talking about it now. And Graham, fair play to him, he's campaigning now. He didn't realise himself how it's between 12 and 14 people a day taking their lives. It's unbelievable. And through this terrible, terrible tragedy which Graham suffered, we're hoping to get a little bit good out of this, the campaign to get it on the curriculum. Graham's raising money. And we're just asking people to talk. It's not a manly thing to talk, is it, these days? Isn't
it funny, though, because on that curriculum, we teach people about all sorts of things, and there are debates about whether some of what's taught to kids is reasonable or not.
Well, yes.
But the point is, we're supposed to be helping to round off children, and this you're saying is just missed out of the curriculum entirely.
There's some things in school that we should not be talking about, but that's a different debate now. You know all about that, and there's some things that we should be talking about, and suicide is one of those things. Young people, I think 4 young people a day, school children, are taking their lives in this country. This didn't happen in our day, did it?
No, I don't think it did. Graham Link, I mean, you've obviously been through a horrendous recent personal tragedy, and I'm very sorry for that. But I guess you're one of those people who, when something very bad in life happens, you try and pick it up and do something positive about it.
Exactly, that's the only thing that I can do. Sean took his own life December. Big shock to us. He was my best friend as well as my son. No idea, no inkling, nothing. He was with us the night before, day after he'd gone. No letter, nothing. Until you lose somebody this way, you don't fully understand. I wasn't aware of all these all these statistics of suicide. I wasn't. I am now. And the only way I can get around it is to help other people. So I've committed myself to doing certain charity events, to help a local mental health group, Enlighten the Shadows, which is a Nottingham-based group. I'm going to do my best for them. That's the only way I can get around it.
Well, Graham, I'm sorry for what you've been through, but you're quite right to try and do something positive. And Lee, I get the point. Yeah. It's a conversation that needs to be had with teenagers, because it is a problem. What chance has it got?
I think it's got every chance. There's the suicide strategy coming out later on this year. Well, Nigel, I just want to close by saying suicide is not means tested. It affects whether you're rich or poor, successful or unsuccessful, whether you're off a council estate or a country estate. You can get any of us. With the help of Graham and these other charities, we're going to really shine a light on this and make sure it gets on the school curriculum.
Gentlemen, thank you. And for those of you watching, we've got the Samaritans details on your screen. You've got any problems? That's a number you can call. A very valuable organisation that Chad Varra set up all of those years ago. A couple of little thoughts from me. What the Farage moment. Junior doctors are on strike. It's a 72-hour strike. They're not even going to get involved with genuine life-saving work. Well, we had a little bit of a problem with my mother yesterday, a suspected stroke. Probably a very good thing she had it yesterday and not today, because we took her in to the local hospital, the Princess Grace, and I have to say, for all the faults of the NHS, if you're a real you've got a broken hand, you might sit there for 12 hours before you get treated. You're a genuine medical emergency, and the treatment and the testing she got last night was absolutely second to none. But I wonder how many people today whose mothers and fathers may have a similar problem will find they don't get any medical treatment at all, and how many lives that may cost. And I'm sorry, junior doctors, I'm really sorry, but to say that your pay's fallen behind since 2008, therefore you demand an immediate 26% increase in your salary, is wholly unrealistic. Just doesn't work. Talking of strikes, you think we got problems with strikes? Have a look at France. President Macron wants to increase the pension age from 62 to 64. They're all going bonkers. And in the streets of Paris, the rubbish is piling up because the bin men are on strike, and much of Paris looks a bit like London did in the winter of discontent from 78 to 79. I'm not laughing at their misfortune, genuinely. A final thought, what the Farage thought. The Silicon Valley Bank, one of the most inclusive and diverse and trendy and right on banks in the world. Yes, they were so full of virtue that guess what? They have gone bankrupt. I have to say, for once, I think the government and the Treasury and the civil service acted very quickly over the weekend to make sure that no UK depositors would lose money, and it was done without a penny of taxpayers' money. So my praise for once, because I don't think government should be bailing everything out. They've been bought by HSBC, who of course are rather close to China. Whether that's a good thing for our tech sector in Britain remains to be seen. But I promise you this one thing. All of these investment companies and banks and funds who say they're ESG investors, they're aware of their corporate social responsibility, and they somehow think you can make money out of being virtuous. I tell you what, they're all going to go bust, believe you me. Now, in a moment, I'll be joined on Talking Pints by Ali Farage. He's been a Conservative campaigner, he's been a DJ, he's now a broadcaster, and he runs something called the Contrarian Prize. Never heard of it? You will in just a moment.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's that time of day. It's Talking Pints. I'm joined by Ali Farage. Ali, welcome to the programme.
Pleasure, Nigel.
Now, you are a bit of a polymath, really. You know, accountant and businessman, and was a Conservative councillor, and were a Conservative campaigner, and you've been a DJ, house music, I understand.
Yep.
Somewhat beyond me, but never mind. And, of course, we'll come in the end of the Contrarian Prize. British Muslim, Pakistani parents. What got you involved with the Conservative Party?
Well, actually, my parents were very political, Nigel.
Right.
No, not in a party political sense, but they were both Conservatives. And I grew up in a household, I always remember there were three tunes to programmes I always used to remember. One was Question Time, the other was Panorama, and the third was Match of the Day, which has been quite topical in the last week. So I was brought up in a very political household.
So you must have been very left-wing if you watched Match of the Day.
So both of my parents were very political. In fact, my maternal grandfather was also the first commissioner of Karachi post-partition in Pakistan. Okay. So politics was always discussed around the table. And my parents, my mother was a doctor, my father was an engineer, were small C Conservatives. They always voted Conservative. And that was sort of ingrained in me. I mean, I didn't automatically follow my parents, but I was always very passionate about politics. Studied it at A-level, went to a university in London, read international relations, politics of the world economy, and then always thought that it was important, Nigel, just as you did, to try and get in there, get on the pitch and try and do something.
Well, you did that, and you were, you know, a councillor at a very young age, and then you stood for the Tories in the 01 election and the 05 election. And actually, with the birth of the A-listers, and with the desire for the Conservative Party to be more diverse than perhaps it had been, you should have been absolutely up there. What went wrong?
Well, who knows? Look, I think timing is everything in politics. I think my timing was a little bit off. I went in a little bit early. I fought the election in 2001, first in Wales. And I think, Nigel, I've always been a believer that you should do your political apprenticeship. I mean, politics has got to be the only area of life where you don't have to do any apprenticeship at all. I mean, you don't appoint a first-year medical student to perform open-heart surgery. You don't appoint a first-year graduate to run a bank.
No.
So,
and yet we finish up with Matt Hancock running health.
True. There are always exceptions to the rule. But look, I was always a believer that, you know, you do your no-hoper seat. I mean, I managed to beat Captain Beanie from the New Millennium Bean Party in Wales. I stood on a milk crate in the middle of Aberavon, being people coming up to me saying, we can't vote for you, our parents will turn in their grave, but you've got guts doing that in one of the safest Labour seats in the country. So I did that, went to Watford, which was a marginal, really worked hard, put everything on the pitch on that one. But sometimes timing doesn't work. Then I sort of got to a point where I'd given everything and it was time to do something else. But I love politics. I'm fascinated by politics, and that's why, you know, I look at it from a different angle now. I comment on politics, which gives you a sort of freedom, Nigel, that you don't get when you're having to be effectively whipped to toe a party line.
Yeah, and you've been doing some work on LBC and doing some broadcasting and able to express your opinions. And we've had you on GB News as a commentator on, you know, many of the programmes over the last 21 months.
Exactly.
Since we first got going. So there's obviously a real passion there.
Massively, massively.
And yet, this is what interests me, the Contrarian Prize. Now, I have to say, folks, that I am not very happy with this bloke. How, in the name of the Lord, can you have an annual Contrarian Prize and I not have won it?
Well, you've been nominated twice, and I've got to say, I will declare it openly. You heard it on GB News first. If it had been down to me, you would have won, but it's a judge decision, panel decision. And obviously, I'm not a dictator, even though I founded the prize and I largely fund it myself with my hard-earned after-tax cash.
It sounds very badly organised.
But look, the reason why I've always respected you on that, Nigel, is you stood up. Look, if you look at the Contrarian Prize, why did I set it up? I set it up in 2012 because if you go back to that particular point, we'd had the phone hacking scandal, we'd had the Hillsborough cover-up by the police where 97 people died and nothing was done, we'd had the parliamentary expenses scandal, we'd had the financial crisis, and I thought to myself, what on earth is going on in British society that all these institutions that were meant to have led our country have let us down? There was a trust deficit at the time. And two other things. I mean, one, it was very personal to me. When I was a parliamentary candidate, you mentioned I stood for Parliament. Back in 2003, I remember being on Channel 4 News, a few days after the Iraq War began, being asked about my view on the Iraq War. And I said, look, I'm sorry, I think this is wrong. Now, at that particular point in time, you'll remember the Tories were backing the government line on the Iraq War. And I thought to myself, sometimes you've got to choose the path of conviction or convenience. You know, you can't always be a bystander.
No, and this gets to the heart, Ali, I think, of something very fundamental in society. You know, I was brought up at school and taught something, I think, rather valuable, called critical thinking.
Absolutely.
You know, here's a problem, here are two potential solutions, and you make your mind up. You know, you're big enough and ugly enough now to make your own mind up. Which of those you think is the right approach? Here's my concern. My concern is that throughout our educational establishment and through the Twitter mobs that exist, that we now reach a point where young people are told these are two solutions. One is virtuous and good, and the other is evil.
Absolutely.
Correct. That actually critical thinking, standing out from the crowd, young people are terrified. I get emails from them all the time.
It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we've seen the closing down of debate massively. It's happening in our university campuses. It started there. And it also came from America. I mean, that's where it originated. Now you have a situation where 50% of academics in our universities here are worried about actually expressing a view because they're worried about their future career path. And you have a situation, Nigel, where I've always believed that if you genuinely care about issues, you've got two types of contrarians, in my view. One who never wanted to be contrarian, they wanted to keep their head down, but they come to a point in the road where they have to stay silent or speak out. For example, the first winner of the prize, Michael Woodford, former CEO of Olympus Corporation, went to Japan after 30 years working for the company, discovered a $1.8 billion fraud, went to the board of the company, wrote 5 letters, said, I want to investigate it, and they fired him. He lost his job for doing the right thing. First CEO in history to blow the whistle on his own company. Or Peter Tatchell, 55 years, campaigner. He's been contrarian since he was in nappies, right?
Yeah.
Literally got his head kicked in by Robert Mugabe's bodyguards trying to do a citizen's arrest. Whether you agree with Peter Tatchell or not, you can't say that he doesn't put himself in harm's way for what he believes in. And I wanted to recognise both of these types of people. And you're absolutely right. Now we have a situation where it's complete mob mentality. I mean, you go on social media, there's no discussion going on. There's no nuanced debate. There's no listening to the other side of the argument to even improve your own argument. None of it. It's moralising, and you're absolutely right. If you disagree, you are dismissed as evil.
Yeah. Oh, and I was certainly thought to be evil by the establishment for daring to challenge this consensus view that we were part of Europe and that was our way forward and everything else. But equally, I mean, you know, when you think about open, free speech and debate,
of course.
You talked about 2012 and the circumstances that led you to set up the Contrarian Prize.
Yeah.
We know better now, aren't we?
No, we know better now. And what you have now is very interesting because you look at the demise of religion in the country, right? So less than half of the people in our country, now 45%, identify as Christian. Now, you would have thought that that is a great advance, perhaps, into a secular society. No, not at all. The new religion now is around certain views that are deemed acceptable, and if you deviate from those, you are dismissed as a fruitcake and a crackpot, and someone who should be closed down. Now that is very, very worrying.
Fruitcakes and loonies, we were called.
It didn't work too well for Cameron in the end, did it? The fruitcakes had their revenge. But the point is that you can't have a situation. Look, the whole devil's advocate concept, right, started in the Catholic Church. Why? Because they wanted to put up people for canonization for sainthood, and the Advocatus Diaboli was behind closed doors meant to completely tear to shreds people who were putting up for sainthood. Why? Because they didn't want to embarrass themselves by putting up someone who would be trashed by people. All the skeletons were meant to be coming out beforehand. Now, similarly, when you have ideas, they're not put up to scrutiny, they're just closed down. How can you even improve your own argument if you don't subject it to the force of reality of other people?
I find the whole thing repulsive.
It's completely bizarre.
Actually, and the fact that I disagree with you, therefore I hate you.
Completely crazy.
And I've never been of that opinion.
Of course.
I mean, in fact, I got on rather well with Jean-Claude Juncker at times.
I know.
I had a right laugh, you know.
Course,
and
of course.
I get people on this programme with very different points of view.
Absolutely.
And try and treat everybody with, the same
But I've always found that you've done that because, look, you and I, for me on Brexit particularly, it was a finely balanced judgment. And you know that I came on a different side of the equation to you on that just slightly. But I always respected you, Nigel, in the sense that just because you had a particular view and you stood out from the crowd and you advocated that when it was a fringe position, it became a mainstream one over years. I mean, you went from contrarian to mainstream. That is often what happens when you... Okay, you would argue something different. But contrarians, in my view, often are dismissed, and they are the ones who... very often will be the ones that in 10, 20 years' time will be proved right, or they actually move society to their position.
Historically, they're very important.
Absolutely.
Now, you're a British Muslim,
Indeed.
Ali, and I remember once you came to Strasbourg.
Yes, we had a great time there.
And I took him out for dinner, cheapest dinner I've ever bought, because as a devout Muslim, you do not touch the devil's buttermilk. How are we getting on, in your view, with integration in society, Muslims, Christians, everybody else? How are we doing?
Well, I do worry about it, and I touch on some of these issues on my show as well when talking about some of these things. I do think that amongst some of my Muslim compatriots, there is a little bit of a denial of an issue within the community around extremism, right? And this is not to say that every Muslim is extremist, because of course they're not. Most of them are going about their business trying to earn a crust like everyone else. But to simply deny that there is a minority fringe who are nutters, who basically want to eradicate us for whatever reasons they have, with a warped ideology, is to fail to address the issue. We have to call it out. And again, it's around debates about ideology. So it's very easy to just sit back and say, oh, I deny these people. They're not part of my religion. They're not Muslim. So I wash my hands of the whole thing. Too easy, in my view. I think there's a battle for the soul of the religion that needs to take place. Now, more generally on race relations, this is one of the most fantastic countries in the world to be from any background. You can achieve whatever you want in this country. So I find it really weird that people constantly racialise things. I mean, I had this debate at the weekend on the show, Nigel, on my show, where we're talking about Suella Braverman and Priti Patel and Rishi Sunak being hard on small boats, which is an issue you've been talking about a lot. And people, again, moralising, saying, how could they do this where they're the sons and daughters of immigrants themselves? And you're thinking,
I know. It's completely irrational, illogical.
Bizarre.
Yes, I mean, do the current cabinet sound like Goebbels and the gang to you?
No, not at all. And the thing that the very assumption that you make that just because someone comes from a particular background, that they will have a particular view, I think is really quite sinister and odd, quite honestly.
I worry.
I really worry about it. So this is a great country to be from any background. You get anywhere on your merit. But what people want to see, and every British person wants to see, irrespective of background, in my view, the majority want to see fair play.
Absolutely.
What they get upset about is people abusing the system to come across. They just want to see equity and fairness. And if you want to come across, come in via the normal immigration system or apply in the proper way. And if there are not enough safe and legal routes, go and lobby for those. And the government's going to be looking at it. But you can't pay people smugglers who are going to abuse the system.
I couldn't agree more. And I want you to go on being contrarian.
Thanks so much.
Ali Farage, thank you for joining me.
Cheers, Nigel.
We've got time very quickly for Barrage the Farage. What is today's crop going to bring me? One viewer asks, does Lineker's victory over the BBC mean that free speech is back for all, or just those for whom it's acceptable to the woke liberal left? Look, this wasn't a debate about free speech. You know, the BBC has a very clear rule: whether you're an employee or whether you're a contractor, you do not bring the BBC into disrepute. And whatever I may or may not think about Suella Braverman and the rest of them, they are not Goebbels and the gang. It was an absolutely crass comparison, an insult, in fact, to many who did suffer at the hands of those people. It wasn't about free speech. It really, really wasn't. Now, the BBC. You see, I'm a softie on the BBC. I think we'll give them one last chance. One last chance. Can we, by May, set up an independent panel? But there's a hardliner who just walked into the studio. Oh, so much more extreme than me. It's Jacob Rees-Mogg. That's it. You're done with them now, yeah?
I think the BBC has suffered from the licence fee. That the licence fee has meant it's been a comfort blanket. It hasn't grown its revenues when other media companies have surpassed it. Sky's revenues are bigger. Netflix revenues are bigger. These companies didn't exist 10, 30 years ago. And therefore the BBC, for its own interest, needs to diversify its source of revenue, and the licence fee is no longer justified.
You're going to hear all of this from Jacob at length, with debate and with someone who disagrees with him fundamentally. It's going to be a great show coming up with Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'm back with you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. But before all of that, before Jacob, let's get the all-important weather.
Hello and welcome to your evening weather with me, Luke Mile. Now, as we head through this evening, it is going to turn colder across the United Kingdom. We've got rain heading southwards with frost, ice and snow to follow. And that's down to this cold front. You can see we've had tightly packed isobars today. That's brought a lot of strong wind around across the country. But as that cold front slips its way to the southeast, you can see the colder air digging in behind. Snow and ice warnings in force as we head through tonight and into tomorrow. Showers will affect northern and western areas, but it's this band of rain, sleet and snow that pushes its way southwards, giving snow up over the higher grounds and temperatures dropping in its wake. sub-zero across the north with widespread frost and ice. So a very cold start to the day here. We'll continue to see those wintry showers feeding in, falling as snow to fairly low levels across the far north, but generally as we head into northern England, Northern Ireland and North Wales, it's mostly above 100 to 200 metres. But for the south through Tuesday, a different feeling day, a lot more in the way of sunshine around, still quite a keen breeze, but this time coming in from the northwest, which will make it feel somewhat colder than it has done today. Through Tuesday evening then, we continue to see the rain, sleet and snow tracking its way southeastwards. Very cold air tucking in behind the blue, really exploding on the map there. It's turning much colder with a widespread frost as we start Wednesday morning. Temperatures typically in our towns and cities falling below freezing, but out in the countryside it will be a lot colder than this, especially where there's remaining snow cover on the ground. Through Wednesday morning then, it's a bright and sunny start for many northern and eastern parts of the UK, but skies clouding over to the west and heavy rain pushing in soon after, with the potential for some snow on its fairly leading edge. Staying unsettled through the rest of the week, but milder again by Friday. Bye-bye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations